This channel supports the use of ADBLOCK.
Okay, I'll admit, I don't actually have any context whatsoever for this quote. For all I know, Debbie Allen could have been talking about creative ways to dismember her neighbor's pet rabbit with a pipe wrench and a stack of warm toast. I just wanted to begin my thing with a quote about creativity and limitations because, hey, that's kind of what this video is about, and so I googled it and that's what spat out. To be honest, there have been countless explorations about the topic of limitations and creativity, and it's almost a universally agreed upon fact. Limitations help foster creativity, not hamper it. However, I'd like to explore this idea across several different mediums. I am a self-proclaimed multi-practice creative. I'm a musician by trade, a passionate writer on the side, an avid filmgoer, and a dabbler in all forms of media. And, as such, I'd like to consider myself uniquely positioned to ponder just how much potential for creativity exists within a set of tools that have inherent limitations. And this is one of the big reasons why I'd like to state that the building mechanic in Fallout 4 is one of the best in the business. No, you didn't hear me wrong. Building in Fallout 4 is amazing. I'd like to begin this explanation of my take on the Fallout 4 building mechanics by first considering two other mediums of creativity. The first is music. On a strictly conceptual level, the very thing that we as a species collectively call music is simply a series or collection of vibrations or sound waves that conform to a particular set of limitations that have been established over time. Concepts like rhythm and tempo, time signatures and subdivisions, pitch and tuning, and musical temperament, these are the outer boundaries that begin to define what the limitations are for sound waves to be considered music. When I say outer boundaries, I mean that these are the things that start the process of defining the foundational structures, the basic set that helps form what we consider to be music. With these tools, we can then create, for instance, the 12 notes that make up musical scales, and then the systematic mathematical division of time that represents note lengths that ultimately create what we call rhythm. And pitch and rhythm then form the basic building blocks for creating music. But in order for it to actually begin to sound like music, it must then be assembled within the confines of a certain set of more defined limitations. These limitations can take the form of melodic structure, rhythmic sense, what we come to know as musical keys or time signature. 4 beats in a bar, in the key of D flat major. Play. Without the existence of such limitations, the sound waves dissolve into dissonance, noise, chaos. Well, maybe a sea of noise with music mixed in there somewhere, kind of like eggs in pancake batter, totally unrecognizable and indistinguishable. Unless you dump the eggs in your pancake batter whole with the shells and all, then you perhaps have retained the recognizable structure of the eggs, but then the eggs wouldn't actually be part of the... You know what, I'm gonna stop overextending my metaphors from now on. With that in mind, the very existence of the limiting boundaries that define this volume of sound we consider music is completely necessary for forming the reality that is music out of the ether of sound in the first place. Warning, there's going to be a lot of these kinds of sentences in this essay. My apologies. That's right. Music doesn't exist unless we draw a circle around the infinite set of noises and separate out a subset from the rest. But this is merely a conceptual idea, not really anything to do with building wooden shacks in Fallout 4. But it does go to show that the relationship between creativity and limitations is in fact a fundamental one, not just an ideological or philosophical one. But we must move on, or else future editing me is going to be complaining about how unnecessarily long this... To look into how imposing certain limitations actually help bolster the creative process, we can delve into the process of actually making music instead of simply defining it. If presented with a sea of infinite possibilities with no restrictions, one can't even know where to begin, and so some manner of limitations help guide the path one must take through the sea of infinite possibilities to construct a singular reality that is to be this piece of creative work. The limitations can take various forms and shapes and zoom in on more and more levels of specificity depending on the direction the piece is taking. A journey begins with talking about the destination, then the choice of the vehicle, then the route, then the many stops along the way, etc. etc. A piece of music begins in the same way. What is it about? What kind of mood is it set in? How fast or slow? What key is it in? What meter is it in? As more of these questions are answered, more limitations are placed on the creative possibilities of this piece of music. But only then does it progress forward in actually being created. Another more specific example of this is in my world of jazz improvisation. In jazz, musicians are often presented with a chance to improvise, to create music out of thin air, to play whatever their creativity allows them to do. But there are structural tools that assist along the way, limitations imposed to guide this seemingly nebulous concept of improvisation. Certain melodic notes work over certain chord structures, certain rhythmic syncopations that move freely inside the metered tempo of the music, ideas that are cultivated over years and years of musical experimentation and improvisation that can eventually be written down into musical theory and shared with the world as tools to begin their own journey of improvisation. Now, of course, these limitations have, well, their limit. While imposing them early on helps guide the creative process, once that process begins to mature and grow, it naturally reaches the edge of those limitations. And from here, we can have two diverging paths. The first path is to continually expand those limitations, to remove restrictions to allow certain previously unavailable possibilities to exist within the creative piece, testing the limits of what is acceptable and what is not. Certain harmonic dissonances that would have been considered unacceptable in the previous set of limitations, playing an F sharp in the key of C, become new ways to explore a whole new series of musical possibilities. It now becomes a modal scale, Lydian for those of you who are musically inclined, or certain rhythmic dissonances, playing a subdivision of 4 against 3, creating new polyrhythmic structures that again open up new possibilities. And music has been in this constant process of evolution, constantly pushing boundaries and testing them for what is possible. This is how music has evolved through the ages. And these days, modern experimentations even include microtonal music, music that exists outside of the traditional 12 notes that form the bedrock of modern Western music. Or rhythmic ideas that push the limits of the regular binary exponent divisions of time. Okay, basically musical rhythm always divides itself into 2 for the most part. I just wanted a smart way to say that. Soon enough, as boundaries and limitations are broken down and pushed through, the question always presents itself at the end, like the shining golden idol in Indiana Jones. What happens when we remove all restrictions entirely? Well, in my world, you get what is known as free jazz or free improvisation. This is essentially a conceptual idea of play whatever you want or whatever you feel like. No rules, no limitations. And it may seem to many that this isn't music? Heck, I'm a musician and I still struggle with this idea. I like my limitations too much, and this exploration into the endless universe of infinite possibilities scares me. It's just like paintings in art. It begins with familiar shapes, representations that follow the natural order of the world, then it expands into creative interpretations and distortions of reality to form a new kind of artistic expression. And at the pinnacle of it, the same question rears its head again. What if we could paint whatever we wanted? So comes abstract art, and the lines between what is art and what isn't start to blur. There are those who will find an appreciation and meaning inside of this limitless expression of creativity, and some who simply cannot. The other medium of creativity I'd like to explore is writing. And no, I have not forgotten the second diverging path. I'll get to it in this bit. Once again, all pieces of writing exist as a fundamental application of limitations, an agreed upon alphabet and grammatical structure. Without this, such a thing as writing cannot even begin to exist, much less convey any ideas at all. Writing as a creative expression of ideas exists inside of the larger galaxy of possibilities of communication. And so the limitations that help form that which we know of as writing serve to remove the possibilities of, for example, pictures and hand gestures, eye rolls, and all other forms of communication. We are limited to words, written words, in a written language. And there is an agreement as to what all of these limiting structures mean. This collection of alphabets arranged in a particular manner to form words, these words arranged in a particular order to form sentences, and these sentences arranged in a particular collection to form ideas. And in much of the same way as music is created by navigating through the sea of endless possibilities with the guiding light of limitations, creative writing follows those conventions. I'm reminded of how we used to have very strict limitations in school when we were first required to write. Think about this for a second. It is a daunting task to teach someone to write something that has never existed before. And so very limiting restrictions need to be put in place to make sure that this process can even begin. Write an essay about what you want to be when you grow up in 90 words. My life as a pencil, 120 words. As you can imagine, one hits the boundaries of those limitations very quickly, and so as we grew older and more mature and had a firmer grasp on how to navigate the sea of endless possibilities, those restrictions were moved, loosened. 350 words, write anything regarding the theme of power. 5,000 words, write a thesis about your thoughts on the inclusion of music education in early child education. Or write a 12,000 word essay about why the Warcraft movie is amazing. Or sit down and write something about building wooden shacks in Fallout 4. Take as many words as you like. And then once again, we reach the same golden idol at the end, and one must ask what writing would look like if all limitations were removed. You might be thinking, this isn't even possible. How can any form of distinguishable thought exist in writing without adhering to the basic limitations of alphabets and grammar? Well, perhaps one creates a whole new language entirely, like Elvish or Klingon. Perhaps one creates the Jabberwocky poem, which by all accounts is filled with total nonsense, but still conveys a creative idea and has meaning behind its unconventional language. Or perhaps one ends up with Lorem Ipsum, which is actually just nonsense. Right? It is nonsense, right? Is it nonsense? Is it actually the secret to making gold out of pudding? Does it predict the events of the year 2639? But writing also helps demonstrate the second diverging path that a creative endeavor can take when presented with the walls of existing limitations. Sometimes the response towards reaching the end of the boundaries of pre-existing limitations is to simply turn around, take a second hard look at the space you're already in, and reinvent the wheel. This takes the challenges presented by limitations and instead transforms them into the very thing that drives a creative idea. An example of this is the haiku. The haiku is a short-form style of poetry originally from Japan, with its most famous trait being the rhythmic structure of its syllables, 5-7-5. Traditional haikus have a lot more depth in them, using specific words and seasonal references, but for the most part, haikus as we, the general idiot public, know them, are basically this syllable structure. If you're from Japan, sorry for reducing your art form into such simple garbage. Seriously, on behalf of all English haiku writers, sorry. This is a haiku. Here are 7 syllables, and here are 5 more. That's a shit haiku. Here's a better one by none other than haiku master Matsuo Basho. Now, these were never originally intended to be written in English, and this example is merely a translation of its original Japanese form. And though some of its contextual beauty may be lost, there is still something unique and beautiful about the simplicity of its structure and the purity of its use of language. And all this comes about by embracing the strict limitations of 17 syllables in the 5-7-5 structure that the haiku presents, by working within the limitations on purpose, by seeing how best to convey this beauty and atmosphere using only 17 syllables, a new form of creativity arises. Some might even argue that the 17-syllable limitation becomes the spark for a much deeper, introspective kind of creativity, one that potentially boasts greater success as opposed to its limitless counterpart. Perhaps an essay of 1,000 words cannot even come close to achieving what Matsuo Basho achieved in just 13. The journey of creativity often takes a path of first embracing limitations, then rejecting them, and then embracing them again. At first, the limitations work as guiding mechanisms to learn the craft. Then, as the creative becomes more and more acquainted with the medium of choice, the limitations are removed one by one. More freedom, more expression, more creativity. The possibilities become endless, intoxicating, and ultimately overwhelming. And then the creative sees limitations no longer as a restrictive tool, but rather the skeletal framework upon which bigger creative projects can be built. And so a creative embraces limitations once again, oftentimes imposing them upon themselves to fire up the creative juices in a way that would otherwise be impossible in the sea of endless possibilities. Allow me to circle back to music, my area of perhaps most expertise, to conclude here. I play the Yaz drums, and as such already deal with a set of limitations within the larger limitations of both music and the genre of jazz. I do not have the ability to create traditional melodic and harmonic ideas like most other instruments, and even if I did, I do not possess the kind of range that an instrument like the piano or the guitar might have. I am bound by the limitations of percussion. And once again, in response to the existing physical limitations of the instrument, one can do two things. Continue adding more and more pieces to my drum kit until such limitations are gone, or reduce down to something even less to force the creativity to work within those limitations. Both of these approaches create different landscapes of musical creativity, so I'm not going to say that one is better than the other. However, in my own personal experience, if you sat me behind this beast, I wouldn't even know where to begin to play. And so here I am, playing a kit that's limited in the sheer number of sounds it can produce, but using those limitations to extend my creativity forward. There are a ton more examples I can give, but I think it's time to move on to games. Minecraft is undoubtedly one of the cultural phenomena of the 21st century. Its popularity is unquestionable, and its influence on video games as a whole is monumental. It is arguably the driving force behind the popularity of general crafting mechanics in games and the evolution of the crafting sandbox genre as a whole. The simple idea that you could start with basic blocks, craft your way into accessing more complex blocks, and then ultimately build whatever you pleased by simply attaching blocks to each other is the embodiment of everything that I'm talking about in this video. But allow me to go through my own personal journey with Minecraft to further explain what I'm going to try and get at here. When you mention Minecraft today, you aren't only talking about a singular experience in gaming. The game has expanded and stretched into so many different styles of play and subgenres thanks to its fundamentally basic concept and the explosion of the modding scene, that the term Minecraft should really be referring to an entire category of gaming and not just one game. Quick note, I'm including the vast diversity of mods here in this list of examples. Some people play this as a survival type game, hardcore mode, zombie mods, and so on and so on. Some people enjoy the adventure aspect, dungeon exploration. I mean, they made Minecraft dungeons because of this. Some people enjoy the building aspect of it, building in creative mode. Some people enjoy technological mods, building automated systems of production. Some people just enjoy the simple farming life. Or some people play quest-based mods, skyblocks, parkour maps, Hunger Games type battle royales. I mean, the possibilities are really endless. But my first experience with the game was way back in 2012 with the 1.1 or 1.2 version. Back then, modded Minecraft was just about to explode with the introduction of things like the mod loader and mods like Industrial Craft and Buildcraft and so on. We'll talk more about these mods later. But vanilla Minecraft was still the most common experience for most Minecraft players. Vanilla Minecraft was a vastly different experience back then compared to what it is now, and the amount of things that were actually available in the game itself was incredibly limiting. There were literally only 298 items in the game when you opened up the creative menu. Building interesting things in the world of Minecraft back then was a different kind of fun. You had to stretch your imagination, use what limited building materials you had to come up with the closest recognizable approximations of what things were. Sure, you could in essence treat every single block as a singular pixel and create gigantic recreations of things the way how Lego can be used to build full-size cars that have the exact same shape and contours of the original. But there was a fundamental challenge in creating things that were to scale with the player character. Again, like creating things in Lego that would be a physical approximation in relation to the Lego minifigure. And so people set to work, using a combination of simple blocks, stairs and slabs together with fences and pressure plates and trapdoors, and the only source of color that we had in this era of Minecraft, colored wool, to create some of the most exciting representations of real-world items in their Minecraft world. Sometimes the more minimalistic the design, the more awesome it was. The fact that one could unmistakably identify this collection of blocks as a four-poster bed with a red duvet and white pillows was a testament to the creative possibilities that emerged from the limited combination of blocks. This was the Minecraft I enjoyed the most out of almost all of my Minecraft experiences. With what limited tools I had, I set about creating some of the most complicated things I could imagine. I quickly learned neat little tricks like making sure the ceiling and floor of the upper levels of my buildings were 2 blocks thick so I could embed lights into the ceiling. I learned about creating slab floors instead of regular block floors so that one could have an extra approach to building when it came to block heights and such. I built an entire hotel, completely equipped with the individual rooms and bathrooms, a reception desk, a banquet hall, and sure, all of it looked pretty terrible, but it was great because I was having the time of my life. And then I grew bored of it, mostly because I had explored the furthest reaches of what was possible with only those 298 items in the game. I had built as much as the limitations of both the game and my creativity within that game had allowed. I had sculpted my Minecraft statue of David, painted my Sistine Chapel, and I was done. I put down my toys and moved on because the game had nothing much else to give. I moved to modded Minecraft for a while in an attempt to expand those limitations, playing mods that took the game in a wildly different direction. And then my computer could no longer handle the stress of running some of these huge mod packs and I left the game behind altogether. But while my attention was away, Minecraft continued to expand its toolkit. Simple things like stairs could be placed upside down, slabs that attach to the top half of blocks instead of only the bottom, tinted glass, stairs and slabs and all the craftable stuff in all sorts of materials. And with that, the possibilities of creation grew. An entire subset of Minecraft players was forming, centered around building enormous structures and castles, entire towns and cities and kingdoms. And then building related mods were added into the game. Mods that improved the selection of interior decoration items, multiple colors and textures of bricks, of sand and stone. The limitations of the game were completely smashed. One could now seriously build anything one wanted. Sometime later, with my rig substantially improved, I returned to the game. Having remembered how much fun I had derived from the creative building aspect of the game, I took a look at some of the mod packs designed for doing so, and I was inundated with the insane amount of diversity and variety now at my fingertips. Mods like Chisel, which allowed for 20 or 30 different block faces for each individual block, or mods like DecoCraft that introduced an entire series of intricate interior and exterior decorations that were made out of clay, carpentry mods that allowed for blocks to be divided and shaped into things beyond the traditional cubes, mods that allowed for angles and slopes, and of course mods like Chisel and Bits, which allowed for sculpting of each individual block. And try as I might, the now almost limitless creative playground was daunting. And it wasn't just that the endlessness of the modded toolset was overwhelming, it was because of one other factor in this thesis of creativity, or the lack thereof: growth. You see, in my previous creative endeavors, I had grown alongside my understanding of the boundaries of the limitations I was working with. A path was set before me and I trod it. In music, I had gone through a more traditional means of growth and expansion, beginning with basic musical ideas and slowly exploring new ones when I was ready to do so, eventually landing me at the feet of the improvisational and less restrictive nature of jazz music. And so my skill with the tools had grown proficient enough that when faced with the seeming lack of limitations, the reaction wasn't one of fear. The same goes for writing. Sitting down to write a piece like this, or a National Novel Writing Month project 50,000 words long by beginning with a blank Google document, isn't quite so daunting now that I've been through the process of having the kiddie wheels of 90-word limits at the start and slowly progressing through the different genres of writing and ever-increasing word limits. My skills with the language have grown alongside my understanding of its limitations. But with Minecraft, what is essentially art, painting, and sculpting, I had not done the same. In fact, my artistic talent in the realm of Minecraft had basically echoed my artistic skills back when we had art classes in school. I couldn't paint for shit then, and I still can't now. And so my skills in imagining and creating complex three-dimensional structures filled with intricate details and architecture were incapable of interpreting and using the now very much expanded limit of what the game presented. And that's why I gave up before I started. And that has been the experience with every other sandbox building type game I've encountered over the years. The more complex and powerful the tools of creation are, and the faster they outstrip my ability to actually learn and use them, the less inclined I am to actually pick it up. I remember the exact same thing happening to me when I first indulged in the world of Planet Coaster. I knew what to expect going in. I had seen the videos demonstrating just how powerful the tools of creation were in the game, and I had also seen some of what people had made in the game and how incredible and amazing and intricate they all were. And I told myself that I would attempt to do something similar. You see, I have been absolutely obsessed with the idea of creating things on a large scale that maintain incredible detail on a small scale. It's the reason why I love building and watching people build Lego cities. It's the reason I love Where's Waldo books. It's the reason I love pixel art wallpapers like these. It's the reason why I cannot help but get attracted to games like Super Build, Pixel People, Dragon Quest Builders, and, well, Minecraft. And so, I told myself that I would try Planet Coaster earnestly. I would take my time, do things slowly, spend as much time as I wanted picking the types of plants that would line the sides of my streets, do everything in small little chunks until they join together to form the ultimate megazord of theme parks filled with insane little details, and nope, didn't even manage to start. Scrolling through the menus of the thousands and thousands of available items and exploring the millions of possible designs only filled me with defeat. I was nowhere near good enough to use these tools to anywhere near their potential. I had the same experience again with Dragon Quest Builders. I have to say, I really enjoy playing Dragon Quest Builders as the base game. I find that the quest-based building of things with given blueprints and goals to be a cool expansion of the idea of pure sandbox building. It not only familiarized players with the mechanics of acquiring materials and also the concept of combining items together to create new types of items and rooms, but it also gave players a goal to work towards if they didn't already have the creative spark to begin with. You could wander off and do your own thing in the overworld if you wished, but you could also go on a quest and build what the game asked you to build if you got bored of the open-ended creative portion. It was cool and fun. But as I played through Dragon Quest Builders 2 and the palette of blocks grew at such a rapid pace, I found myself very quickly drowning in the ever-expanding possibilities that the game presented. The limitations grew too much, too quickly, and once again, it left my actual creative ability behind. My grand plans and designs for the overworld were soon overtaken by the sheer number of different blocks the game presented, and where once the choices I had to make were simple, like which out of the 4 available choices of windows did I want for my building, they were now exponentially more complicated. I had to filter through hundreds of choices for the type of floor I wanted for my buildings, never quite satisfied with anything I had picked, because I would then stumble upon something much later that seemed so much better. My final example of this comes in the form of a much underappreciated piece of software called Lego Digital Designer. I actually have a lot of fond memories tinkering with this thing, especially when I first discovered it. The thing is, LDD had a couple of block sets that you could pick, essentially limiting the types of bricks you had available to you. The only way you could actually access every single existing brick in the LEGO directory was to change a line in the config file, and that unlocked the unique building mode called Extended Mode. The funny thing is that I was already enjoying myself very much before discovering Extended Mode. I had actually managed to build myself a neat little tank and some other small projects, but then I actually did encounter Extended Mode, and at first, I was overjoyed. I now had no restrictions whatsoever. Any LEGO piece I wanted in any color with all of the printed variations. I could build anything I wanted so long as my computer could handle it. LDD can be very heavy on the CPU and GPU, and so I decided I would finally do it. I would finally build the LEGO city of my dreams. To hell with piece limitations. You can kind of tell how this goes by now. So once again, having not learned my lesson, I gave up. And I ran. I ran back to the warm and friendly arms of much more limited games. I ran back into the safe embrace of Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 and my boring cube houses in Minecraft and following strict instructions found in LEGO sets. I quickly abandoned the notion of ever creating anything great in Planet Coaster or Minecraft Builders mod packs. Heck, even vanilla Minecraft was starting to look more and more daunting each time they released a new update. And so when I discovered this, I instantly fell in love.
Oh man, it's giving me a headache just looking at it. Yes, this is the summoning Satan room. I didn't say what it was. It's a spaceship. I really need a lot of hot water when I bathe. When I take a shower. It's how I, become a better person.
By the time this game came out, I was already familiar with the extent of my relationship with limitations in creative building games. I was familiar with how weak my actual talent was and how much I was still dependent on the limitations to propel my creative ability forward in these games. I had already gone through the despair of trying and failing in all the examples above, and so when I saw gameplay of House Flipper for the very first time, I immediately knew that this was now something that I could work with. The game is incredibly limiting, with a very restricted list of items at your disposal. You were given a fixed canvas to begin with, only allowing you to tear down and rebuild the interior walls of the particular house you were working on. The game didn't allow you to change windows or build stairs. The game didn't allow you to repaint furniture or mix paints for the walls. The game treated wall panels as columns instead of individual tiles like the floor. It didn't let you paint ceilings. It didn't allow for items to be placed on top of certain items, and you couldn't for a very long time in the game's life insert your own custom items into the game. You had to work with whatever they gave you, and that was it. And it was incredible. The amount of ridiculous things I managed to achieve in that game was huge. It also took a while before new expansions and new ideas were added into the game, allowing a player like me to explore every last nook and cranny of the boundaries of the game's limitations. I would play the game and expend all of my creative energy doing some of the most ridiculous ideas, challenging myself to do things within the game that it clearly wasn't made to do, pushing the very limits of what the game originally had. And then a few months after that, new content would be released, drawing me back in with the new possibilities the few new houses and items presented. But each time the game was updated, the expansion of limitations was small. And the game never once felt like the possibilities were endless. In fact, most people complained that the game allowed them to do too little. But I loved it. And there's a reason for this, and that is the nature of the relationship between creativity and problem solving. When people think of the creative process, they're often picturing some sort of nebulous and free process, as if things appear out of thin air and materialize themselves onto the selected canvas by sheer force of will. Or sometimes people think that the conceptual creative ideas exist as a whole before the process of creating begins. This is in fact rarely the case. Most creative processes are a constant flow of encountering problems and then solving those problems. Scientists have theorized that the moment of solving a problem is associated with the release of dopamine in the brain, giving a sense of joy or elation upon solving the problem. As the creative process is a constant stream of this activity on varying levels of scale, This explains why people can find the creative process incredibly enjoyable. And so, the big reason of why a game like House Flipper becomes such a source of joy to someone like me is because while it doesn't quite have the vast potential of creativity that other sandboxes possess, its limitations present an ever-present series of challenges that one must overcome in order to achieve any kind of creative success at all. And so when I set out to build myself a prison with only the tools given to me, tools that were originally intended to simply renovate the interior of houses to make them pleasant places that sell for high amounts of money, actual house flipping, I found myself in the middle of this stream of problem solving that is very much the same type of creative process that I encounter in the mediums of creativity that I am actually skilled at, without needing the skill element. Allow me to explain. The idea of jazz improvisation is also a series of mini problems to solve. How do we create melodic ideas that smoothly transition from one chord to another? And in the music of jazz, where what we call the key center is constantly shifting, this means that the journey from one chord to the next doesn't necessarily present itself in the most obvious way. And so, we as musicians set out on a long journey of study and discovery, learning all the different ways to navigate all the different paths that chords can take us. And then when it comes time for the actual performance, we do this problem solving in real time. Watching a jazz performance is pretty much watching that problem solving live on stage. And when you know that's the case, it becomes beautiful and mesmerizing. But something like jazz improvisation can be very daunting because of the scope of possibilities that the harmonies in jazz allows for. And so one can really only ever enjoy the problem-solving process if one has the tools necessary to solve the problems in the first place. Without that skill, the process can be frustrating and painful and downright unenjoyable. House Flipper, on the other hand, has such a limited range of tools for you to play with, making the mastery of the techniques really easy, but still allowing for the same kinds of problem solving if you know just how far to push the limitations that come with the game. And so, by choosing projects that seemed unnatural for a game like House Flipper, I managed to slip into the stream of problem solving that really tickled my creative muscle. How do you build a dark and ugly prison inside the walls of a house? What's the smallest possible room that you can make in this game? How do you make a scary scene out of soft toys and home decor? How do you make a house out of only bathroom stuff? Can I make an entire house out of a single kitchen? And then the game released the Garden Update, and I was presented with a brand new type of problem solving that the game didn't actually even have to begin with. The introduction of the Garden Update gave us one of the few stackable building blocks, the garden stairs. This was one of the few bricks that you could stack over and over again to however high the game allowed, which as I found out is actually pretty high. And with this particular brick, and with the ability to now stack items on top of other items, the game had also introduced a simple set of physics beyond the simple rules of gravity to govern how you were allowed to stack items. This meant that garden stairs could not be stacked to the point where they would logically fall over. You couldn't put a block on top of something with half of its mass hovering in the air. That's just logical. But of course, this simple bit of physics was easily broken. Well, to be fair, it never really needed to be so complex in the first place because most players wouldn't push the limits of what these mechanics were capable of. Most players would be happy to rearrange furniture inside the house and create using the tools that were given. Not me! I wanted to see just how much I could achieve with the humble garden stair. And so I figured out every single way in which you could circumvent the simple physics coded into the game. And with that mission in mind, I was now presented with brand new problems to solve. And with brand new problems to solve came new streams of creativity. It began with simple questions. How high could you stack something? And then, can you make blocks hover in mid-air? That means I could potentially build a floating floor. That means I can build a multi-story building. That means I can build a castle! And I did! Bask in its glory! In a game designed to renovate interiors, I built entire exterior structures. This was by far some of the most fun I've ever had in a building game. What the game seemed to do was present a seemingly perfect amount of limitations, enough to where there was still a ridiculous amount of possibilities, enough to keep me playing for hours and hours, and also at the same time allow for problems to arise naturally and entice the kind of problem solving that is associated with the creative process. The limitations here were right on the balance of allowing enough to be done within their boundaries without feeling constrained, yet still being present enough that if one actually wanted to embrace them to further propel their creativity, like the limitations of the haiku, you could as well. And that leads me very comfortably to my favorite building game of all time. Now, I've spent so much darn time already pretending like I'm some sort of professor on the topic of creativity before coming to the meat of what I actually wanted to say that you all should already know what I have to say about Fallout 4, so I'm just going to say it. Fallout 4's settlement building mechanic is the greatest system of building I have ever encountered in my entire gaming history. And you only need to read everything that I've said so far to understand why. This thing, much like House Flipper, exists in this somewhat perfect world of limited creativity. It allows for all the creative energy that comes with an unlimited sandbox, with the help of some small mods like removing the item limit in settlements and console commands that give you unlimited building materials, and it has the same kind of limitations that really foster the problem-solving stream of dopamine that we associate with the creative process. Okay, I think I've been repeating myself too much, so allow me to explain things a little more from a different angle. It's like Lego. Wait, I've done that too? F it. It's like Lego. Lego bricks do not come in an unlimited range of shapes and sizes. In fact, for the most part, Lego is in itself a very limited building block. It fits together in a very specific number of ways. There are only a very limited amount of sizes for you to work with. That being said, the assortment of Lego bricks that have been produced over the years have made it possible to approximate almost anything you wish without ever overcomplicating the actual building process itself. And the key word here is approximation. I think that has been Lego's greatest strength. And some of the best Lego designs are the ones that use the limited toolset of bricks at their disposal to create something that unmistakably resembles the item it is trying to approximate without ever needing to replicate the item perfectly. I'm suddenly reminded of this epic moment from an old Yogscast video. This moment has stuck with me over the years because it's the kind of creativity that is born out of limitations that I absolutely love, and also a real demonstration of the joy that comes from the problem-solving element that is clearly evident in Duncan's reaction at the end.
You fucking won!
Of course I won! Look at it, it's fucking beautiful!
Oh my god! How did you win?
This is what Lego does constantly. It allows for the almost unlimited possibility of building limited things. Or is it the limited approximated building of unlimited things? I'm getting confused. Either way, a product like Lego pretty much hits the perfect spot of limitations in what it achieves as a creative tool, and that's why it remains as one of the most loved building toys of the past century. And Fallout 4 achieves this as well. Wait, no. Fallout 4 doesn't just achieve it, it does so perfectly, and a whole lot more. You see, one of the things that Fallout 4 allows you to do is expand your acceptance of its limitations when you're ready to do so. You are in control of how many creative possibilities you choose to explore as you take on bigger and bigger projects. For instance, my first settlements were simply coming to grips with how all the snapping mechanics work, how to eventually use the existing combinations of floors, walls, stairs, and roofs to create structures of different shapes and sizes. And while this is just the tip of the iceberg of what the building mechanics in Fallout 4 allowed you to do, it already presents you with quite a large amount of possibilities for you to indulge in, and at the same time, a series of ridiculously hilarious problems that you have to learn to circumvent. You got to figure out how to build structures in new shapes instead of giant cubes or squares, elevated walkways, balconies, overhangs. There was just so much you could already do. And then at the same time, you had to constantly struggle against the snapping mechanics, which was actually incredibly rewarding when you finally figured out how to circumvent the problems. For instance, certain roof tiles didn't snap to other roof tiles and only snap to wall tiles, and so if you wanted to make a connected roof, you had to figure out a system of installing walls and then removing them to leave your desired roof design at the end. It was fantastic. It kind of felt like things were always possible if you just worked at it a little bit. And then when you were pretty much done with exploring the limitations of, let's say, the wooden shack pieces, you could explore the barn or warehouse pieces, which had half walls and larger sized doors. Or you could go and attempt to figure out the enigma that is concrete structures. And some of these different building materials presented new problems to solve, like different wall heights, and sometimes you could snap pieces together from different material sets, and sometimes you couldn't. It was great and terrible, but great, and the terribleness only made it even greater. And then, when you were done fiddling with the impossible snapping of all the different building materials, you could explore interiors. This presented the same opportunity as House Flipper did, with its somewhat limited variety of items that you could work with. But this meant that if you wanted to design a particular kind of room, you had to use your creativity to create an approximation of it. If you wanted a kitchen and a restaurant, you couldn't replicate one perfectly, but you could make a damn impressive approximation of one. I once built an entire hotel in Fallout 4. Why do I keep building hotels? Complete with dining area, sports gym, reception desk, and even restrooms with individual cubicles. It was a blast. And then, when you were done exploring the limitations of the interior design elements, you could move on to one of the most exciting and wonderful elements in Fallout 4 settlement building: electricity. I have to say, the electricity component of the Fallout 4 building mechanic deserves its own video in my opinion. It is my favorite thing to do when building in Fallout 4. Here is a system that is rife with problems and limitations. You couldn't make wires go through walls without cheating, for instance. Wires had a limited length that you could stretch them for. Connectors had a limited field that they could reach, so you had to figure out how to get power to the particularly troublesome nooks and crannies in your structures. You could of course build generators everywhere if you had unlimited materials, but you could also take it upon yourself to power everything in your grand designs from a single fusion reactor. You could choose if you wanted ugly, dangly power lines inside your buildings to save time, or you could challenge yourself to hide all of the ugly wires in creative ways. It's great! And on top of all this, there was the added problem of having limited reach when it came to holding and placing items. This meant that if you were bent on creating mega structures, as I am wont to do, you had to figure out how to give yourself access to all the parts of your structure, either by way of exterior scaffolding or platforms, or temporary walkways that you could dismantle later. Or you could just, cheat and fly. But where is the fun in that? And all of it was so rewarding. The moment you stepped back and took it all in. The massive building sizes you could achieve, the interior designs that told stories if you were patient enough to craft them, the view of the lit up buildings in the middle of the night, the fully functional elevator systems, the comprehensive elevated walkway systems. It was extra satisfying to see it all at the end because of how much the game fought you along the way. The fact that you had to wrestle the limitations that the game presented into submission to erect your masterpiece made the end product that much better, and the journey that much more enjoyable. Sure, it can be frustrating at times having a simple wall refuse to snap in the location that you wanted, and sure, it can be frustrating as hell falling off your own platforms and having to manually climb back up the stairs again and again, and yes, sometimes it makes me want to punch a wall when I've invested so much work into my project only to find out that a particular part doesn't actually fit where I thought it would. But all of this is why building stuff in Fallout 4 is truly a remarkable experience. I don't think I've ever come across a building mechanic that is quite as enjoyable. I've returned to Fallout 4 several times over now, and every single time, I've built something ridiculous and enjoyed every second of it. Sure, there are games that have more streamlined mechanics or provide higher levels of control and detail, resulting in more possibilities for creativity, but none comes close to Fallout 4's ability to derive the kind of joy in creativity that is born from limitations. And that makes it the best building sandbox in video games. So originally this essay ended there, but I actually think I haven't quite explained why it is that there is such a thing that describes what I consider to be the perfect amount of limitations in creative space. Something like that shouldn't really exist as a concept. Isn't the very idea of creativity and the creative process a thoroughly subjective one? Don't different individuals thrive in different levels of limitations in creativity? Don't all of my examples and this entire video actually prove that there is no such thing as perfect limitations? Well, perhaps perfect isn't exactly the word here, but I can assure you that the word I would use instead would be very close to it. As I mentioned in part 1, the path of a creative starts out by first experiencing limitations as a tool for learning, like training wheels on a bike. Then, as the skills of the creative grow, they seek to expand those limitations. The middle of the journey is where those limitations are cast off entirely and boundless creativity takes over. Some creatives will thrive in this institution, and a crazy amount of things can come from this unfettered creative expression. But some will be lost in the invisible vortex of this endless sea of possibilities. And so, some journey back into their limitations from the peak of the journey, but instead of using these limitations as means of assistance, like training wheels, they now view the limitations as challenges to be overcome, problems to be solved that will instead birth new creative endeavors. Like taking the bike with training wheels to the half pipe just to see if new tricks are possible. So it's almost like a Gaussian curve type journey, or better, it looks like this. Yeah, only a weird nerd like me would use a mathematical curve to represent creativity. We've discovered the mathematical formula of creative growth, everyone. This is now a scientific paper. I expect the same kind of respect as all those other ones. Anyway, if you'll just indulge my logic a little bit, you'll see what I'm getting at. I don't actually want to represent this idea with a mathematical graph because I don't know what the x and y axes represent here. I just think the shape's kind of evocative of what I'm describing. The ascent of skill and creativity and the expansion of limitations till it reaches a peak, but that peak actually reaches into infinity, and then the embracing again of limitations all the way to the most restricting levels. It doesn't make any sense, but bear with me. The thing about the Fallout 4 building mechanics is that they present themselves in a way that allows for the creative process to track along this curve of growth, but it peaks somewhere pretty near to the limitless pinnacle. But it is near enough that we're allowed to progress far enough along our creative journey and then make the leap over to the opposite side of the curve, allowing us to almost skip past the limitless creative phase, never quite getting sucked into the vortex of endless creativity, and shortcutting our way into a space where we are able to finally turn those limitations to our advantage. You see, one doesn't necessarily have to experience the helplessness of the infinite realm to desire and utilize limitations in the creative process again. One doesn't necessarily have to test those boundaries to see if they can indeed swim in that vortex. But if one isn't allowed to progress deep enough into the extent of the limitations that a particular toolset presents, one doesn't get high enough along the curve to potentially leap to the other side. Without this growth alongside the expansion of the limitations themselves, you can't really learn how to embrace them as tools to propel greater creativity in the future. You get that paralysis moment like I did with Dragon Quest Builders. The game still has limitations, but without the steady growth and learning that pulls you along while slowly expanding upon the toolset you're given to build, it still becomes overwhelming, despite the fact that the game is still confined to the voxel-based building system that is similar to Minecraft. I was left looking upwards into infinity because I couldn't yet look across. Why am I talking about a hypothetical mathematical curve so poetically? I am way too deep in my own metaphor. But that's the big reason why I say the building mechanics in Fallout 4 are absolutely perfect. They allow for this curved progression, opening up more and more possibilities as we learn the boundaries of the eventual limits of the game's mechanics, but this reaches a point high enough on the curve of creative progression that the next step to dive back into those limitations to push creativity forward again is easy and natural. So few games do this with their building mechanics. Most end up either giving far too few creative tools, limiting the creative process far too early, or giving far too many choices too soon. thrusting the creative process too quickly into the nebulous vortex of seemingly endless possibilities, causing one to drown before growing strong enough to bend those limitations to the creative will. Fallout 4, it is nothing short of perfect in this regard. Alright, I have to make one final concession before we conclude this new thesis. I've spoken as if these claims are objectively true, and they unfortunately are not. Yes, despite my best efforts to state otherwise, Fallout 4 is not the perfect building video game. Truth be told, there is no single perfect set of tools for any creative endeavor for every single person. The subjectivity lies in the person using the tools and their understanding of the limitations they present. It is, however, still objectively true that all creative individuals have a particular set of limitations that are absolutely perfect for them. And the goal is to find those limitations that allow you to grow, allow you to constantly push your creativity forward, and allow you a safe and comfortable zone that will maximize your creative potential. And mine is found in Fallout 4 because it is just so